this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. I am thrilled today to have Premela Deck here with us in our Ask the Expert segment. So we are going to talk today about forensic social work and family law. So Premela, welcome. I would love if you would introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you for having me, Julia. Premela Deck. I have a private practice in Canton. I'm licensed as a family law attorney, though I don't litigate very often. I lead mostly with my mental health degree, so I have a PhD in social work, and then I'm an LICSW. I did my clinical supervision with Julia, so this is so fun to be with you.
Yes, I feel like it brings it full circle, and to think about where you and I were when we first connected with each other and where we both are now. I feel like it's such a blessing to have this opportunity to sit, pause, reflect, soak it all in. So I appreciate that. So tell us about your climb. How did you get into this field?
Okay, so it probably starts with academics. My mother's a lawyer. She's a family law attorney, and I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. So I went looking for law schools that obviously I'd be interested in, but also had a social work component to social work, because my mom does family law. And throughout my entire life, it was really ingrained in us that like families don't belong in court, and that there's just so much more to family law than the law. So it felt like the best way for me to be a good family law attorney was to have a mental health degree or some background. And that came through in like so many examples. So talking to people who have experienced intimate partner violence, talking to children, there were just so many dynamics in family law that made it feel like learning how to talk to people about their experiences was going to be a crucial step for me. So it's clear that I wanted at JD/MSW. So I went to Western New England Law, and then I did Springfield School of Social Work for my MSW. And then I started, one of my first jobs like in law school was I was a clerk for the city of Springfield. And my job was to help uphold building codes. And it sounds really boring, but it was super interesting. So like the city has these building codes on like how to maintain your property. And my supervisor there was phenomenal. And one of the cases that we kept running into was this really old man who was a hoarder. And so my job as working for the city was we condemned his home in the 80s. I think he was 89. And I remember in my gut being like, this is just wrong. Like, I get that we have a duty as the city to protect the rest of the like citizens, because for hoarding, there's risks of like vermin or disease or fire. So there's real reasons why you have to condemn a building if there's hoarding, but also there's mental illness that's happening there. So my job was just condemn the building. And there was no follow through, like get this man into some sort of treatment or some sort of placement, and he was sleeping on his porch. And that to me was the first time where I was like, oof, there is some sort of marriage between law and social work that I need to figure out. And that's really where I want to start. And then because of my experience and like my desire to do family law, I started leaning a little bit into that direction. And so now I do family law really with that work.
Yeah. So this blending and this dual degree, how has that shaped your practice? And is that something that you look back on and are really grateful that you went down that road? What are your thoughts kind of after the fact now having that?
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I remember, like I said, I wanted to lead with my law degree. I remember being in my MSW program, so in my social work class, and the dean of the social work school said to me, Premela, you are not at this school to supplement your law degree. And I remember thinking in my head, like, but I am, because I can't be a lawyer and a social worker. I have to be either a lawyer or a social worker. So either I'm going to be a lawyer with a mental health degree that like supplements it, or I'm going to be a social worker with a law degree that supplements it. And all of that is to say, Julia, that like starting that day to like today, I have struggled with how do I be both humans? Like, where is this career where I can be a lawyer and a social worker? And so that's where I found forensic mental health. So I ended up I graduated law school. I ended up clerking for the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And I'm in North Carolina. I have no friends. I have no family. And have these weird degrees. I'm trying to figure this out. And I ended up applying for a PhD at UNC School of Social Work. And the whole goal was like, I pitched to them, yo, there's like some cool stuff here. Like criminal court, we have people where we're trying to do like dangerousness hearings. We're trying to understand are people a risk to society. I already saw it in just like building codes, like boring stuff, how mental health could be helpful. Probate and family court, we know how that could be helpful. So there is something to this between this law and social work overlap. Let me study it. I don't know. I guess I was convincing because they said okay. So I started studying it. And then I connected when so after you do your qualification exam, they call you ABD, all but dissertation. So once I got to ABD status, I connected with William James College, and they have a really great forensic program, which is where I met you.
Yes, they sure do. So, well, one theme that I'm hearing is there was a lot of heart behind all that you were doing. So, with your kind of witnessing your mom's experience and this whole families don't belong in court, then this paramount experience that was really pivotal for you early on, and really wanting to figure out these two components. You want them both to be in your professional life. You see value in both, but that blending has not necessarily been easy. So it sounds like forensic social work has kind of been that blend. For those who don't know, what is forensic social work?
Yeah, no, that there's probably a really smart definition out there that I have not committed to memory. My conceptualization of it is like exercising mental health things
Hmm.
in a legal backdrop. So, and it's super challenging because we have other people watching us. We have other people who are making demands. So this becomes really evident to me. And some of the work that we do is high conflict family therapy. And that is known often as reunification therapy. It's not quite the best term. So the best term would be like resist refuse dynamics or parent child contact problems. The idea there being that there's a child who's refusing to see or has some issues seeing one of their parents. Um, and so the conceptualization here is there's a therapeutic issue, like a child has a strained relationship with their parent. But if we only look at that, the parents are warring often. Behind the warring parents are warring attorneys. Behind those people are, is a judge who knows this case for 15 minutes and sees it once every couple of months. So it's really challenging to treat the family without really understanding all of the players and the influence those players have. Um, and in addition to like those lawyers and the parties, there's also other people who are involved. So there could be a parenting coordinator or a child custody evaluator. So all of these players have played a role here. Um, and so that to me is like forensic
Hmm.
social work is operating, doing your job, family therapy, but in a backdrop that's not actually conducive to
Hmm.
therapy. And you have to figure out how to make these, I mean, I guess it goes back to the broader topic is how do we make these dueling worlds
Hmm.
speak well?
That was a beautiful definition. So I know that obviously you've had experience with multiple different aspects, and that's a tall order to really be mindful of all of these different aspects and players, as you call it, throughout this process. Tell me more about your experience in these different roles and how that influences your work today.
Yeah. So if I were to think of like my role, so I'm only in the family law arena. I have colleagues that do forensic social work in other arenas, like criminal law, for
Hmm.
example. So in the family law arena, our company sort of does three main jobs. So the first would be report writing. The second might be parent coordination or parent coaching, and the third
Hmm.
therapy. So report writing, that would be like child custody evaluations or conversations around waiving a child's therapeutic privilege. So, like, that's an interesting role for us as therapists, where the court, for whatever reason, wants access to a child's therapist. Now, a child can't give consent to waive their therapeutic privilege, so the court appoints somebody like you or I to come in and research this and talk to the
Mhm.
parties and talk to the child and talk to the therapist and make a decision on whether or not the court should be able to talk to that child's therapist about their privileged information.
Mhm.
So, like, all of that's under report services. Then I have
Okay.
parent work. So we have parent coordination, which is also a really cool role, um, where sometimes these parties just really can't agree on whether Johnny gets to do soccer or not. So the court gives a very small judicial authority to a parenting coordinator to help these parties make decisions. And if they can't make a decision, the PC will make a decision for them, and that decision
Mhm.
can be binding unless the court overturns it. So that's one branch of parenting work that we do. We also just do general, like, co-parenting coaching. We have a 4-session course, which is like, put a band-aid over the bleeding, like, learn how to communicate. Like,
Mhm.
let's just, you're getting a divorce or you've been divorced, but things aren't working great. Let's learn how to communicate here. And then the third branch being therapy. So therapy could be co-parenting therapy, which isn't really a thing. Like, the DSM doesn't cover that at all, but or insurances don't cover that, but we have that. We have individual therapy, and then of course, like, the high conflict family therapy that I was mentioning earlier.
Mhm. What challenging but important and such impactful work. So, these are obviously all the services that you provide at your practice. Tell us more about the practice, the growth you've experienced, and that experience being in this leadership role and overseeing these other clinicians and forensic social workers.
Yeah, no, great question. Yikes. Didn't like, that's like a whole other, so I spent, like, so much time being like, "Okay, cool, what's a forensic social worker? Who am I?" And then my business started doing really well, and my business became reactive, meaning I didn't plan for it to grow, but I had such demand that I hired help, and then quickly it became bigger than I anticipated, and
Mhm.
suddenly not only am I figuring out what forensic social work is, but I'm figuring out, like, what a CEO is. So, like, that was an interesting climb, I guess. So I've
Mm.
shifted gears slightly. I know you and I had touched on this once before. There's, like, this interesting dynamic where people come looking, for you, right? So people come looking to work with me, and I have to feel confident in my team. I have to be able to market my team and not me.
Yes.
Um, so that's been an interesting challenge for me. And then
Mhm.
also, so much of it was in my head. So, like, asking, nobody calls and says, I need high conflict family therapy. They call and they say, my child hasn't seen me in like 12 years and X, Y, and Z. And you have to try to, like, screen it and help them find the right service in that moment. Um,
Mhm.
so I had to figure out how to write, like, a standard operating procedure, like a manual
Yeah.
essentially, on, like, how do I screen these cases and what does that look like? And then having confidence giving over control, which was really
Mhm.
challenging because I worked so hard to develop, s- like, what I do and the services that I provide, and I take such pride in what I do and the services that I provide.
Yes.
And then having good systems in place. So
Absolutely.
making sure that I'm always neutral, and that the appearance of neutral, like, I might feel like I'm objective and that I'm being neutral, but if it doesn't appear that I'm being objective or being neutral, that's a problem too.
Mhm.
Role of, like, switching over to, like, a business owner, a CEO,
You answered
a
it.
marketer,
Yes.
like, all of these things.
Yeah. So there are a lot of aspects of it that it sounds like at the outset were not necessarily at the forefront of your mind. You were like navigating, this is what I do, this is how I blend these two worlds. This work is really valuable, but you're speaking to the need. And I think it's so incredible that we as a community have you all to refer to that really specialize in this area. But the work itself, and I speak from experience, can be some of the most difficult work I have ever done in my career. How do you all support one another through that? And how do you navigate those challenges of, I mean, high burnout
Yeah.
rate? These cases can have a really long duration potentially. So, what are some of the strategies that you guys use around that
Yeah, I
piece?
mean, I think, So diversification, I think, is really important. If I only did
Hmm.
report writing, or if I only did parenting coordination, or if I only did therapy, um, that would be really hard for me because they have varying degrees of success and varying degrees of involvement. So, like a child custody evaluation, for example, I come in, I write a report on what I see, but it's like a glimpse. It's like, this is what I saw in 3 or 4 months, and then I'm out. A parenting coordinator, for example, I could be appointed to for years. So if you have this diversification, you're playing different roles. You're mindful of what, staying in your lane, like what job you have right now.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly challenging because sometimes there have been cases where I really like both parties and I just want to be like, lock you in a room, sit
Hmm.
with me for like, I don't know, 2 days and we will solve this. We can do this, but you can't do that. And that's challenging. So supporting one another, I think diversification is really important. I also think
Hmm.
just like group chats. So we do like lunch
Yes.
bunches. We're all really active in the peer consultation groups that are
Hmm.
available in our community. And that's important, not just, some levity, like to hear that everybody else is struggling with these cases, but also to check your
Hmm.
bias. So it's really important to start like talking about these cases, obviously, like in a confidential type way, like
Yes.
hypotheticals,
Mm.
um, because it's incredible when somebody says something like, well, why do you think A, B, and C? And
Yes.
suddenly you're forced to think about why do I think A, B, and C? Your biases are checked, you're developing other hypotheses. It keeps you
Hmm.
fresh. And then I start thinking of it as like a
Yeah.
puzzle. So it becomes a little bit less stressful and a little bit more, this is my role, this is the service I can provide, and I'm doing the best that I can. And this is, how I want to address the issue that's in front of
Hmm.
me.
So it seems like through all of it, you still really enjoy the work. I mean, that's apparent in listening to you speak about it and to be surrounded by like minded individuals who are obviously really passionate about it as well. When you say diversification, I mean, I also know that you have other pursuits as well, teaching and your involvement with the high conflict parenting course and beyond. Tell me more about some of the other ways that you diverse and use these still skills to continue to spread the word and
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
share.
So there's diversification like within my caseload, but then also like how I learn or give back to the community or what
Yes.
have you. I really love teaching. So I have taught at some master programs in social work. I taught at BC, UNC, and Bridgewater. And then I do a decent amount of teaching so those are students, right? MSW students. And then I do a decent amount of teaching for professionals. So at William James College, I teach their parenting coordination course, or I co-teach that with a couple other facilitators. So just like those are different. So you have students who are young, incredibly jaded, and you're trying to like inject some excitement for them. And then I also teach the high conflict parenting class at William James. I just was actually named director of that program. And that's cool too, because the interface there is that's an interesting role because often the parents aren't voluntary clients. So the only way to get there is if there's a court order or a parenting coordinator order.
Hmm.
Um, so all of those roles, I'm dealing with different clientele. So I guess that gets back to that diversification role,
Yes.
different people. And so I am in a different role. The people I'm talking to are different types of people. They have
Hmm.
different needs. And it all kind of centers around how do we make divorce and separation and families in crisis, how do we make that better?
Hmm. You clearly wear so many hats. How have you learned to navigate and maybe even still are trying to navigate, like you said, stay in your own lane and kind of, I'm sure that it's helpful to have a team to bounce ideas off of in these groups you speak of, but how do you navigate that piece of all of these roles, being mindful of all of these factors and making sure that you're in alignment?
Yeah, no, it's I think it's really important. So for forensic social work, much of what we do is appointed by the court. So really being mindful of what I'm appointed for. So if I'm a
Mhm.
parenting coordinator, they might give me authority on varying things. So I need to be clear. Do I have binding decision making authority? Do I have some sort of limited authority? Is it on absolutely everything related to the child, or is it limited to maybe medical care or something like that?
Mhm.
So being mindful of like the task that I'm given. Same
Okay.
thing with report writing services. So like child custody evaluations. It's really easy to like start working on these cases and seeing all of the many things and intervention points that we could jump in on, but the courts only asked you to weigh in on like custody or a parenting plan. So being really mindful of like what is the task before me, um, and knowing that there are other qualified professionals out there, I think has really been helpful
Mhm.
for me. I have one job. I'm one piece in this puzzle. I do my job and then if I can, I make referrals or recommendations for like what a next step might look like. But then I have to step away and I have to have faith. And also, I mean, I think we do this in just regular therapeutic work too. Like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Mhm.
And so at some point you have to do the job of kind of lighting the way. And it's not your problem if they don't
Mhm.
choose that path. So I think having some peace with that, that you can only control you can only control your behavior, and you can't move
Yeah.
mountains. So what's
Well
your
said. I mean, that is a piece that I am sure gets easier with time, but is never ultimately easy because if what you're saying is you kind of have both of these influencing your decisions. I mean, you are obviously trained as a social worker and you shared a little bit about what got you into this field, but then having the family law background and recognizing there is a job to do, that heart is still there. These are still human beings, these are families. There are still going to be situations that happen when you're no longer involved, and there are these layers of complexity. So, it sounds like you've done work on kind of coming to acceptance. You're clear on what your responsibilities are. You do that to the best of your ability, but then from there, a lot of it is up to those individuals. And that's tough. How are you training your staff around that? So with the team, and I'm sure some are more seasoned than others. If you have someone who's newer, how do you help them with that piece if they're really struggling?
yeah, the piece being wait, sorry, can you elaborate on that? The piece being what part?
Yeah, the piece around that acceptance of we can only do so
Right, yeah.
much and we'll try to do that as well as we can, but then from there, the ownership is not fully on us.
Yeah, no, I think that that is a lesson, that, like, everybody has to learn. So not just therapists, but, like, I'm thinking about me
Yeah.
as a parent. Like, I can set my child up for success, but if he's gonna, you know, not do his homework or he's gonna be a jerk, like, that's on him,
Mhm.
and I can only do so much, and so there's so much I think the term that we're dancing around is, like, radical acceptance.
Yes.
Like, there's only so much that we can do, and I think that this is a lesson that we learn as humans, and then also a
Mhm.
lesson that all therapists we love a client and you wanna, like, see them
Sure.
succeed, but if you start losing sleep at night because you're wondering, check yourself a little bit. And I'm thinking a little bit too about your comment on, like, layers of complexity.
Mhm.
One thing that's unique about our practice is we're so, careful to make sure that we actually include those layers of complexity in our practice. So for
Mm.
our high conflict family therapy work, I require a session with the attorneys because I can do so much, but if the attorneys are behind the scenes, stirring the pot a little bit, then that's a
Mhm.
problem. So I need everybody's buy-in. I need the attorneys to be willing to hold their clients accountable. I need sometimes I'll get family members who aren't the immediate family who are involved in the process. So really thinking about the whole system that these families are placed in and how I can invite them in.
Mhm.
Um, and then yeah, to your question, your original question on how do you help newer people accept that they only have one role to play here. I do think networking with the larger system, I feel so much confidence, talking to you, talking to other providers. There are many other providers. There are many other good therapists out there, good lawyers out there, good judges out there. And I have to have faith that somebody else there out there is going to do that.
Mm. Well said. You gave one really solid takeaway that I think is important to note, and I wonder if you have others. So, your process within your team is to get really clear and concrete, and that there are some kind of parameters and guidelines that you set. What are some other things that are kind of standard practice for you all that set you up for success beyond getting the attorneys on board and starting there?
Yeah, so it depends on kind of the role that we're doing.
Mhm.
Most cases, so not the report writing services, if we kind of ignore that. So like the parenting coordination cases, the family therapy cases, almost all of those start with okay, your family has changed. It's no longer a marriage or it's no longer like a romantic relationship. It's now a business relationship. And you're in the
Mhm.
business of raising children together. So, how do we create processes that feel business like? So, those processes have to be respectful, they have to be accountable. So, I make like rules with them. And together we write up like a contract essentially. It's not formal, obviously, but like if I email Julia, I can depend that I can rely that Julia is going to respond within, what do you think is reasonable, Julia? And she's going to say 24 hours or 48 hours. And so we have this
Mhm.
really concrete conversation. It's really solution focused at the start. And I think the idea there is these families are really on high alert. They're sometimes traumatized. There's a lot of anxiety. And I know you know, but like through toxic stress, they can't even like process
Mhm.
information right now.
Right.
So doing some work on just like bringing that down, you can bring that anxiety down and that stress level down by knowing what to expect.
Mhm.
So here are the rules. This is how you're going to engage me. This is what we're doing in the next session. This is what I expect you to do for homework. Having some concrete rules, and then not until those are moving somewhat seamlessly do we engage in like, I don't know, talking about wounds and talking
Mhm.
about like the deeper issues. Um, Also helping them to understand like advocacy stances.
Okay.
So I had a great case. I loved this case where we were talking about dad really, really wanted the kids to do karate, and mom really, really didn't want the kids to do karate. And so that feels like such a binary, right? Like do karate or don't do karate. But if we took karate out of it and
Mhm.
talked about, Dad, why do you really want karate? It came out that there were like values that he thought karate gave. So discipline, self defense. Um, and for mom, why she really didn't want karate was, the kids don't really enjoy it. That being said, there were a lot of good skills here. So together we were able to work with the parents on, okay, well, what's something that the kids might enjoy that could teach them defense, self-defense, or discipline? And even if
Mhm.
they don't enjoy it, what's something that you guys can commit to? Can you commit to like a 6-week program? Because sometimes kids have to do things that they don't love if their parents feel like it's important.
Mhm.
Um, and I had another similar case like that around the COVID vaccine where there was a 17-year-old child and one parent wanted the vaccine and one didn't. And again, that feels like a very binary question, yes or no. And we started talking about the values behind it. So this child's 17. In a matter of months, that kid is going to have to make decisions on their own. Rather than focusing on the problem of does this child get a vaccine, can we focus on the problem of how do we teach Johnny how to make decisions?
Mhm.
So we ended up walking away with both parties agreeing that Johnny would talk to mom for her opinion, talk to dad for his opinion, talk to the pediatrician, do his own independent research, and Johnny would make the
Mhm.
decision. Um, so doing some of the teaching like our clinician, it's anger, but if you dig underneath, you have like frustration or like
Mhm.
embarrassment or all of these other things that could make somebody present as anger.
Mhm.
So that's where the puzzle kind of comes
Mhm.
in. What's really underneath the surface here, and how can we help these parents learn to talk about values rather than stances?
What incredible case examples that I think really shed some light on what this process can actually look like, but how there's more going on behind the scenes than we realize. And I also think it's indicative of how, if you were at a point like you described early on where you were trying to marry these two worlds of law and social work, how beautiful you are navigating that in these cases where you're really mindful of both. You are giving these parents an opportunity to really pause and get a little bit deeper, but you're giving those parameters, guidelines. This is our structure and our process so that they have things to hold on to when they can be really emotional, and obviously it can get there quick when it has to do with their children, when it has to do with their own opinions and, like you said, values. So, what incredible work. What advice would you have for someone who is entering the mental health profession in terms of this work. I mean, I know for me, it's still only been a few years since I even knew what forensic social work was. So I really am trying to
Me
do
too.
my part, right, to spread the word. What advice would you have to someone going into the field about this work if it intrigues them?
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of proceed with caution. I think that this is a highly litigious field.
Hmm.
So you want to be able to dot your I's and cross your T's. I was pretty meticulous about the training that I got. I make sure that I'm at most of the local conferences.
Hmm.
In and of itself, the field is new. So like the guidelines for best practices are constantly changing. They're new anyways. So the field is new, the way we're thinking about it is new. Students in like mental health schools aren't even learning about this. Like it's very that there's a forensic mental health program. There's a few out there, but it's pretty rare. So first
Right?
you have to somehow stumble into the field, and then you develop some sort of interest. And I guess yeah, I think it's fascinating. There's a lot of work that can be done here.
Right?
There's so much room for creativity and for developing new practices, but also knowing that the clientele we're working with, often they're not super enthused to be working with you. So you want to make sure that you're clear on expectations. You want to have solid contracts, service agreements
Hmm.
for what you're doing. I operate only off of a retainer because people don't like me all the time. And if they don't like me, they're not going
Right?
to pay my bill, and I don't work for free. So you have to have these systems in place to protect you against people who might get angry at you at some point. So,
Hmm.
touch wood, I haven't had a board complaint yet, but I know it's coming. Like I know one day I'm
Right?
going to have one because I'm dealing with really highly litigious people. So, if you're able to say, I'm working on
Hmm.
best practices, I followed the APA guidelines, or I got peer cons.
Hmm.
So making sure that you're involved in the community.
Yes. And if someone is listening, whether it's a professional that can think of someone that they're working with that could benefit from these services, or if it's someone themselves who is in this type of co parenting dynamic and could really use support, what is the best way for them to start that process and get this help?
Um, Help being like on how to co-parent well, or like
Yeah.
going through the
So the
family.
coaching component. Yeah, like some additional, like you're talking about the guidelines and how you practice. If someone is thinking that that could be beneficial for them, but maybe not confident that their co-parent would be in agreement, how do they start
Right.
that process?
Yeah. So I think if you're an individual co-parent and you're thinking I could benefit from these services, I often say to people, you can only control yourself. You can't control your co-parent. So what are things that you could do differently, to change the system and change, sort of the pattern that's happening here? There are a lot of good books out there. So Bill Eddy has Biff.
Hmm.
Ben Garber has a really good book, called Mending Fences for High Conflict Family Therapy. You could do individual co-parenting coaching. So I have a lot of clients that come to me just one-on-one, and they'll say, I got this email from my co-parent. It's making me see red. How do I respond? And
Hmm.
coaching them on how to do that. And I do that in my parenting coordination work too. If somebody is constantly responding with a tone that's not quite appropriate, if I have them send the message to me, it doesn't take very long before they learn how to write in a way that's businesslike, that's conducive to better co-parenting work. So I
Hmm.
think you can do a lot of this work even if your co-parent doesn't want to engage.
Hmm.
You on your own can make meaningful changes. Um, Same thing, to attorneys. Like you can work with your clients on ways to make meaningful changes even if their co-parent isn't really cooperating.
Hmm. That's helpful. And then the clients that come to you that aren't necessarily voluntary or it kind of comes about, can you just speak to that process and how they come to your attention?
Yeah. So I have a lot of not so super voluntary clients. Sometimes that's actually like the best way to make these cases work because I can align with them. I can say something like, "Yeah, no, I know you don't want to be here. I don't want to be here either. So, like, what do we have to do to get out of
Hmm.
this?" That happens a lot with kids. So when I think about the kids who, like, particularly teenagers who maybe don't want a relationship with their parent, I'll be honest with them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I get you don't want to be here. The court has said you have to be here. This is what we're looking to get out of this. This is what the court is telling us we need to do. So I make the court sort of the bad guy.
Okay.
I don't want to be the bad guy. And then I try to connect with them. So this is what the court has told us we have to do. How can I help you get there? Because the sooner we get there, the sooner you don't have to see me anymore. And you can have your Wednesdays free again. A way for us to connect. And that's sometimes helpful. Most of my clients just really need to feel like they're heard. And so I spend a lot of time developing that rapport. Tell me what you need me to hear. And then also I hear that this feels not, right, or it feels like some sort of grand injustice. What can we do to get you out of here? Like, what is it that people are expecting, and how can I help you get there?
Okay.
Because this protracted conflict is not good for you. It doesn't feel good. You don't want to be here. You're spending lots of money, or your family's spending lots of money. Let's get you out.
Yeah. There was so much invaluable information. What would you say would be the biggest takeaway to somebody listening that you would love for them to still be thinking about and letting it marinate once they've completed this podcast episode?
Forensic social work or forensic mental health is like wicked fun. It's a puzzle. It's like this, it feels like the Wild West. Like there's this new frontier, and it's forensic mental health. We have to develop guidelines. We have to develop best practices. Within my own business, I'm developing processes that make sense. Only recently have I decided that like high conflict family therapy cases can't be done with just one provider. That's my opinion, but like best practices are constantly developing.
Right.
So if you're looking for a challenge, if you're looking for something kind of new and exciting, it's wonderful. But also, be smart when you dive in. Get some training, reach out to other people. There's so many people who want to pass the baton, right? Like this field, there's such a need. So there's so many people who want to help others get up to snuff and be ready to do this work and be able to meet the needs of the community on this.
Thank you. So for those who want to follow along with all of the incredible things that you're doing out there in the world of forensic social work, or would like to utilize the services of you and your practitioners, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so our website is S as in Sam, D as in dog, F as in Frank, S as in Sam, mass.com. So SDFSmass.com. You can email us there. I'm working now with William James College and their directorship for the High Conflict Family Therapy Program. So if you're thinking High Conflict Parenting Program, so if you're thinking you needed to connect there for that services, you can do that as well. Yeah, I'm around.
Great. Well, I cannot thank you enough, obviously, for our collaboration. You have been such an incredible support to me, such a wealth of knowledge. Could not be happier that you have expanded your team and for the incredible work that you guys are doing and supporting each other through it. So I thank you for your time, and I know that there are a lot of valuable takeaways for the listeners. So very much appreciated.
Yeah, likewise. I've learned from you. You're the beginning of my career.
Thank you all for listening. Until next time. If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.